Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello. My name is Hasan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 104. With our book today, a beast of a book, and we've already actually introed it, so you can go back and listen to episode, I believe it's 82, where we introed this book, but it is a beast of a book. I should just say that up front, that spans lifetimes. And that stands as the gold standard for world-building proto-historical narratives. This book is so big, my translation comes in at around 1,400 pages, not including notes and an appendix, that it intimidates even the strongest, most confident, and most literate reader. And forget business reader, and forget leader. It just intimidates people. Matter of fact, when I held the book up, to show to my co-host today, I promised him I wouldn't make him read it, and he was relieved. He laughed, and not in like an ironic sort of laughing way. He laughed in sort of a, I'm not reading that kind of way. Fortunately for him, he doesn't have to. I'm doing the reading, and he is providing the color commentary today. Along with City of God by Augustine of Hippo and The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky, this is one of those books that is so complex and multifaceted that it is easier to ignore the book rather than to read it. And many people do ignore it, unfortunately. Or it's easier to engage with the themes of the book outside of the context of the book rather than actually reading the book itself, which a lot of people do that too, because it's hard and long. And it's written with complicated Russian names. However, I've decided to take the subsequent years on this podcast because, well, I have years to burn, to pull apart this book and to examine its themes in the context of leadership. Because, to be frank, what else are we going to embark upon here at the end of the fourth turning? So today, we are covering the first 5 chapters of Volume 1, Part 1, of War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. And today, I've invited our regular host, Tom Libby. How you doing, Tom?
I'm doing fantastic. Hey, Son, how are you?
Even more fantastic that you don't have to read this book.
Even more fantastic. No, I don't. For those, I gotta. I found this very funny when Hasan was and I were talking about this. Like my wife and life partner is a literature major. Every time I tell her about the books that Hasan and I talk about, she goes, "Why ain't I ever on that show? How come Hasan doesn't ask me to come on?" And then I told her we were doing War and Peace today, and she went, "I saw the movie."
Interestingly enough, I also saw the movie. But I don't know if I watched the same version that she did. So there is a 5-part filmed in Russia, but in French.
Interesting.
Version on HBO Max that you can get. I made it through part 1. I made it through part 2, and I made it through halfway part 3 before I tapped out. And each one of those movies is like 2.5 to 3 hours long.
Oh.
It is ridiculously, brutally epic.
Oh,
oh yeah. In the and it's shot in French. No. They're speaking Russian. That's then translated into French, and then you have to read the subtitles in English. That's what it is.
Ah, okay.
So yeah, they're original Russian speakers, but they're dubbed in French, and then you read the subtitles. So
interesting.
It is. I had never seen anything like, and it was shot back in like the 60s and 70s. And so I never even heard of this before.
I gotta let her know. I guarantee she will watch it, and she'll watch all 5 parts. I'm just letting you know she will watch all 5. She loves this stuff.
Well, it definitely is. This is a book that when I tell people about it, they go, and then they slowly walk away. Like they slowly back away. And then I show it to them and they're like, my God, sir, why would you want to read that? And then they sort of run screaming for the hills. And it is a book, I will be honest, that I started to try to read when I was about 15 or 16. And I made it through the first volume 1. And then I moved on to Anna Karenina because I thought that was easier. It is a standard for world building. Like each one of these characters in here, we're going to talk about the characters today. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things in it today. But each one of these characters is a fully realized human being. And we'll talk about how long it took Tolstoy to write this. But they are fully realized human beings. They're not caricatures, and they're not paper dragons, right? He's doing something a little bit different. He's trying to tell stories about life while Napoleon is floating around your continent. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means today too. So let me pick up from War and Peace. I'm going to pick up in chapter 3. So it's volume 1, part 1, chapter 3. This is how you know this is an epic book. It has volumes and parts and then chapters. This is how you know. So Anna Pavlovna's soirée was now in full swing. On all sides, the spindles were humming away nonstop. Apart from the aunt and her sole companion, an elderly lady with a thin, careworn face who seemed rather out of place in this brilliant society, the company had split into 3 groups. The one with most men in it centered around the abbe. Another group of younger people was dominated by the beautiful Princess Helen, Prince Vassily's daughter, and the pretty little Princess Bolkonsky, with her blushing features and a figure too full for her young age. Mortemart and Anna Pavlovna formed part of the 3rd group. The Viscount was a pleasant-looking young man with gentle features and manners, obviously full of his own importance, but modest enough because of his good breeding to indulge any company that he might find himself in. Anna Pavlovna was clearly showing him off to her guests. Just as a skillful head waiter can pass off as supreme delicacy a cut of beef that would be inedible if you'd seen it in the filthy kitchen, Anna Pavlovna served up to her guests that evening first the Viscount and then the Abbe as if they were supreme delicacies. By the way, there are lines like that throughout this whole entire book. Like, it's amazing. In Mortemart's group, the conversation had turned to the execution of the Duke of Einhain. By the way, a lot of the events that occur in War and Peace are based on historical events that actually occurred in Europe and in Russia in the during the run-up to the Crimean War, and then during the Crimean War and after the Crimean War, which was a knock-on effect from Bonaparte and everything that had been going on with Bonaparte. And so what Tolstoy did was he took the events of the Crimean War that he had served in, and he sort of went backwards in time and looked at what had happened during the Napoleonic Wars, and then merged a bunch of different events together. Okay. So anyway, this Duke of Einhain had actually been executed in Europe. The Viscount held, back to the book, the Viscount held that the Duke had perished through his own magnanimity, and there were special reasons behind Bonaparte's animosity towards him. Oh, I say, do tell us all about it, Viscount, said Anna Pavlovna, delighted to feel she had insinuated a touch of Louis XV in the old-fashioned French phrase she had used. The Viscount gave a polite bow and a willing smile. Anna Pavlovna brought them into a circle around him and beckoned everyone over to hear his story. The Viscount was a personal friend of the Duke, she whispered to one of them and murmured to someone else, the Viscount is such a good raconteur. By the way, that's a word I use all the time. Just pause. Back to the book. To a third person, she said, you see, what a man of quality. The Viscount was presented in the most refined and advantageous light, served up like a joint of beef, garnished with salad on a hot platter. The Viscount was preparing to launch forth. His smile was subtle. "My dear Helene, do come over here," said Anna Pavlovna to the gorgeous princess, sitting in the very center of the other group, a little way off. Princess Helene rose with a smile, the same unchanging, beautiful woman's smile with which she had entered the room, with a gentle rustle of her white ball gown, trimmed with ivy and moss. With her glistening white shoulders, glossy hair, and sparkling diamonds, she moved between the men as they stepped aside to make way for her. Without looking anyone in the face, but beaming at the company in general, and apparently bestowing permission for everyone to admire her wonderful figure, her full shoulders, and her fashionably exposed bosom and back, she glided up to Anna Pavlovna, and the brilliance of the ballroom seemed to come with her. Helene was so exquisite that she not only avoided the slightest hint of flirtatiousness, she even seemed to be embarrassed by the all too evident, truly devastating beauty that was hers. It was as if she wanted to tone down the effect of her beauty, but couldn't do so. "What a beautiful woman," said everyone who saw her. The Viscount shrugged and looked down as if transfixed by a mysterious force as she arranged herself to sit before him, not sparing him that ever-dazzling smile. "Madame, I doubt my abilities in front of such an audience," he said, bowing with a smile. The princess rested her round, bare arm on a little table and found it unnecessary to say anything. She smiled, and she waited. Sitting up straight through the Viscount's story, she glanced down occasionally either at her beautiful round arm so casually draped across the table, or at her still lovelier bosom and the diamond necklace above it that kept needing adjustment. Several times she also adjusted the folds of her gown, and whenever the narrative made a strong impact on the audience, she would glance across at Anna Pavlovna in order to imitate whatever expression she could see written on the maid of honor's face before resuming her radiant smile. That little piece right there proves that simping for women on OnlyFans didn't just start with the internet. That's been going on for a while, ladies and gentlemen. When I read this piece and I read what Anna Pavlovna, who is the hostess of this party, when I read what she set up, right? And we'll talk about why War and Peace opens with a party, because that's what it does in a minute. I think of the line from Ozzy Osbourne in War Pigs: "Generals gather in their masses, just like witches at black masses." Everybody's getting together. And Anna Pavlovna, in the days before mass communication, Anna Pavlovna was one of the many people in polite Russian society, and of course impolite Russian society, from the highest sort of viscounts and princes and dukes all the way down to well, the lowest peasant, who would get together to exchange information because they didn't have telephones and they only had letters, right? And so parties were opportunities to mold statecraft, but they were also opportunities to perform in person everything that people perform now on their smartphones. All the technology has done is make it go quicker. And just as on our smartphones and on the internet, one of the things that strikes you in the first 3 or 4 chapters of War and Peace is how much women have controlled the flow of information throughout the course of human history and have wielded great influence over communication channels at aristocratic levels, as they do even now in our post-industrialized time. And many of them, just like Anna Pavlovna, organized their troops. They resupplied and shored up defensive positions in conversations, and in general behaved like they controlled everything, because they did. At least in the domestic party sphere, they did. So I guess the place to start with Tom here, because I just realized I didn't have any questions for him in the script because it's been that kind of last 2 weeks.
I did notice that when I read through it. I was like, wow, so you just had me on for my pretty face.
There you go. That's right. What do we think of War and Peace, I know. You haven't actually read the book. You've had other people next to you read the book, but what have your impressions been of this book when you've heard
Well,
about it? And Anna Pavlovna's party and the Princess Helene's gloriously arrayed bosoms.
okay, well, I'm not talking about bosoms, but I did, I will be honest with you though. There was one thing that caught my attention when you were reading that, and I didn't understand what they meant when they said full shoulders.
I think they mean fully exposed.
Okay, that makes more sense. But I was trying to figure out, what the
Oh, they're
term
not
meant,
doing lifts. They're not like doing shoulder lifts. They weren't going
right?
to the
Like
gym.
I
They
was
weren't
like, are
crushing
they?
it.
Yeah, like what are they? Like as versus like were they trying to say she was a heavier woman because she wasn't petite? That anyway, I was
I
just trying to
think she
figure
was
out.
not a little woman. Yes, I do grant. I will. Yes, because
But anyway,
because Tolstoy says round arms.
right, right, okay,
So, and back in the day, this is also something that's very helpful to understand this book. Back in the day, and the only reason I know this is because I was an art major and I studied a lot about this crap in college. But if if the women that you were responsible for as a man were uh how would we put it in our time, were more fully figured, that was a sign of wealth. That was a
wealth,
sign of
yeah, right,
success, right?
right.
So as you moved up the aristocratic chain, people should be eating better
Right.
and sitting around more and having more of these drawing room slash party type conversations. And so that was a sign you were doing well. It is only in our era that as you go further up the aristocratic line, everybody is thin and rich.
So the other thought that came across my head was kind of how you're talking about the party. People, I don't think people realize how much the when you talk about the women controlling the flow of information, right?
Yeah.
The subtleties behind that, which by the way still exist today, just so you know.
Oh, yeah.
So when like when your wife says, it would be really, it wouldn't it be nice if if we could paint the room a different color? I think the room would look so much better yellow. And you go, all right, I guess I'm painting the room yellow. She
It's
didn't
painting the
say
room yellow.
go paint the room yellow. She
No.
just made just so anyway. Back in those times when they were like, oh, did you and so you should talk to so and so. I'm sure you'd have wonderful conversation. That was like that was like code, right? Like
Oh,
that
yeah.
I want you to go talk to this person because the information that the two of you have is going to be impactful to each other in some way, shape, or form. And I think the funny thing is some of these human behaviors, regardless of whether they're on your smartphone or not, we still deploy in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
We still
Oh,
do
yeah.
this in certain fashions.
Oh,
So
well, when the book opens, Anna Pavlovna, before she even is having her party, she is how can I put it? She's buttonholed by the first person to arrive at her soiree, Prince Vassily Kuragin, a man of high rank and influence. And so the prince comes in, he starts talking to her in French, and there's a they have a political discussion about Emperor Alexander and about Napoleon, and she very carefully manipulates him, and Tolstoy does a good job of showing this. Or, I shouldn't say manipulate, that's a hard word. Maneuvers him in the conversation into really asking what he really wants to ask for, which is a favor for one of his relatives. I believe it's his son, one of his relatives, and she has access to the people that can grant him the favor, and that's the only reason that he showed up to the party. And she knows it, and he knows it, but no one's saying it out loud.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think back then we were a little better at reading the room, so to speak. Like for like
Mm-hmm.
what you just said, right? So in today's world, I think we're just a bit more direct, right? Hey,
Yeah.
son, actually, a, 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 a joint colleague that we have. I
Mhm.
was talking to a couple of weeks ago. So I know your audience doesn't know Kevin, but so I was talking to Kevin a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, listen, I would really like you to talk to my son because he needs some straightening out and he's not listening to me. And I know he'll listen to you because of your area of expertise and what
Mhm.
the question is about, right? And like we're just more direct about that today because we don't have that. I'm not sure if we don't have it anymore or we don't need it anymore, or I don't know what the not part of this is, but we just don't do it anymore. We don't have that subtle to your point, like he only went there because he had a favor to ask, and he just
Right.
asked it in a way that she maneuvered him over, right? So we don't have an equivalent of that today, especially in social media. We're calling
Yeah.
people out left and right, and we'll just call you right on the carpet. We'll just,
I think
just
we do. Well, I think you're right. In social media, we don't have the equivalent of sort of that um indirect.
well, because we have less fear too. We say so many things on social media we would never say to somebody in person.
Sure. Well, you and I had this conversation, or no, you and I didn't have it. John Hill, another guest of mine, John Hill. We talked about the way of the samurai, and one of the by Inazona Tobi. And Inazona Tobi was a Japanese writer in the early 20th century who wrote about how the samurai had developed and the rules of being a samurai in Japan during a time when the samurai were basically dead and done. And one of the points that Natobi made was, and we actually talked about it, John and I talked about it on the podcast, um, was about how the samurai, or maybe it was all of Japanese society, was more polite even in the early 20th century than the West,
Yeah.
because Natobi went back and forth right after World War I, trying to shore up U.S. Japan relationships, right, and relations. And he married an American woman, and so he got to see both sides of that coin. And so John and I talked about this idea of politeness in the context of social media. We have, and I made the point, and I'll make it here. We've lost what it means to be polite.
Mm.
Um, Part of it is, and I made this point again on that other episode. Part of it is because of the behavior that we've allowed to occur on social media that has now spilled into our real life communication. We've sort of abandoned that. But, and you see this with Anna Pavlovna and her party, I think in general, historically, as an American culture, we've always looked at politeness as one of those things that was just sort of aristocratic and European and pointless.
It's almost like politeness is equivalent to weakness at certain facets. Not all, but at certain things.
Yeah.
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 Especially when you're talking about the building of capitalism on top of the American politics, right? Like that's
Right.
so politeness is kind of a weakness because they want you to be direct and they want you to just you know you're supposed to go 100 miles an hour full steam ahead, and politeness doesn't really lead way to that.
Well, and this is part of the trouble that modern people have with understanding the Civil War. Like, so modern people don't understand the American Civil War. And I again, I can bring this up in the context of War and Peace, because Tolstoy was writing during a period of time when the emancipation of the serfs was occurring in Russia, and that occurred in 1861. Well, the emancipation of our slaves occurred in 1863, except ours occurred during the course of a war. Theirs occurred during a time of aristocratic and what do you call it? Royal upheaval in Russia. Two different contexts,
Yeah.
right, to solve the same problem in essence. But in our time, or not in our time, in our history, the idea of a Southern gentleman, right, which even that face you just made right there, even that smirk right there, like that's an anathema to us now. We don't understand why people defended slavery from the perspective of Southern honor. We have zero understanding of that now. And we also really don't understand why people would go to war for honor. But that's the furthest end of going to war for politeness, going to war to preserve a polite culture. And the Southerners, by the way, said that about the Northerners. If you go back and read what they said, they're like, no, you people are rude. You're rude and you're disrespectful, and we're going to teach you a lesson. We're going to thump you so hard that you'll never come back down here and be rude and disrespectful ever again. Now, the North responded to that by saying, to your point about capitalism, we'll just use capitalism in industry. How about that? And that was what one of the fundamental threads that was underneath the Civil War. But I think that those threads still exist underneath America today. I don't think they've gone anywhere.
No, I don't. I agree.
Have you ever been to a party like that, by the way? I've been to parties like that before. Have you ever been to a party like that?
I have.
Where like everybody knows why they're there, but nobody's saying it out loud?
So I have, and you know, the odd is I found it to be one of the most odd. It was a Teamsters union party.
Oh my. Okay.
Yeah. So it was Teamsters, and I found it. First of all, why was I there? I found it very odd that I was there in the first place. And for backstory here, it was like a gala event that they were looking for. It wasn't strictly Teamsters there. It was like Teamsters, their families, and so on. So it was like fundraiser, like it was all these things all wrapped up into one. But if you just sat there and you read the room, you know for a fact certain people were there for a very particular reason. And like this person had to meet this person. I saw some people from our state government offices there. Listen, I'm not saying anything good, bad, or indifferent about the Teamsters Union. I'm just saying that I know for a fact that there were certain people from the governor's office that was there because certain people from the Teamsters Union was going to be there. And I could see them going off into corners of the rooms and stuff. And I was like, huh. So this is real. Like that's all. That's the only thing that went into my head was like
everything I ever saw in Donnie Brasco was actually true.
I'm just gonna bite my tongue and bite my lip and whatever else I have to make bleed, so I don't say anything.
So okay. So in those kinds of situations, I've been at that kind of party before as well. You're hyper aware of where you're sitting in the hierarchy.
Oh sure, yes.
And you're hyper aware also of where not to screw up. And you don't, but then you have to balance that with the idea that you have no clue where you could screw up.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could screw up just by going over and talking to the wrong person, and you have no idea that you just screwed up. I don't know what to do with that, but again, I think that those dynamics still exist. You know,
I think in certain environments, I think like when I think, you know, where I see it sometimes, I brought up this one particular, but I've been to others that were not so drastic, right?
Yeah.
It's still a lot of charitable galas are like this today. Mm-hmm. It's a very who's there, who was invited that didn't show up, and that's noticeable, right? Like, mm-hmm. And there's some caveats to all that, and who knows it and who notices it, and who I definitely think in that nonprofit gala world, that still is very strong. I think I think it's actually very strong comparatively speaking to other parties.
So let me ask this last question. So in our egalitarian time, when everybody can be everything and anything, and anybody can choose to be whatever it is they want to be, and we're all egalitarian, okay, fine. It's still women running that system.
Oh yes. Yes.
It's like, I'll tell you, if I'm going to that party and it's a gala for a nonprofit and I've been invited for a very specific reason, I got to admit, I'm not going to the dude who's the executive director. He doesn't know anything. Yeah. I'm going to the woman who planned the party.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm going to ask her, why am I here? Like, what do you want? That's the directness part. Why am I here? What do you want me to do? And of course, you know, if you're in a Southern situation, they'll just tell you, oh, sugar, just go ahead and enjoy yourself, which that means you better be on your P's and Q's.
Bless your heart.
That's right. It doesn't really mean, by the way, for our Yankee listeners, it doesn't mean bless your heart.
It doesn't mean anything good. Let me just say that.
It doesn't mean anything good. Okay. One last question. How do leaders read the room? How does a leader read the room? If they're in a room full of Teamsters or a room full of nonprofit gala-driven apparatchiks, and have no idea why they're there, how does a leader read the room? Because many leaders struggle with this, particularly high-performing leaders who tend to be I think, a little bit more on the spectrum towards autism, or maybe even towards Asperger's, and maybe don't pick up those social clues nearly as quickly, but they're really hyper competent at what they do. How does a leader, because this is a real challenge question, how does a leader read the room like that?
Like, first of all, I think it starts way before that.
Yeah.
I think if you're invited to that type of environment and you're a leader, there are two things you need to do before you even get there. Is you need to know the guest list and who's going to be there ahead of time, so that you
Mm-hmm.
can then go look at them, find them out, search them online, understand who they are. If you're in that environment, you need to know what you're walking into way before you even have an opportunity to read the room. Once you get there, then it's really a matter. And by the way, doing that, knowing the guest list, and then being able to check them out online, you yourself should have a pretty good idea of why you're there, based on who's also there, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be sure tell signs where, again, if you're a CEO of a Fortune 500 company and there are 20 other CEOs of Fortune 500 companies there, you're in good company with yourself, because you know that's what they're targeting, right? So you probably already know half these people because you're watching that Fortune 500 list, and you're following them, or whether it's on X or you're following them on LinkedIn or whatever. You're signed up for their newsletter, for crying out loud. You might even invest in some of their companies, whatever. But you're gonna have a better understanding of, not how do you read the room, but where and why you're reading the room is way more relevant at that point, right? So you're gonna go in, and and again, so I did this, that gala that I was talking to you about. I was kind of, my brother-in-law was a Teamster, so and he was somewhere in he was not in charge. Don't get me wrong, but he was not just a regular, I'm paying my dues kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the layers are in there, but he was somewhere up in the middle of the layer of hierarchy. Not important enough to mention, is I guess my point, right? But again, when I was invited to this thing, I was like, oh, so who's going to be there? And he's like, I have no idea. So I went to the event page, the website, the web URL page that they had, and I started looking at what type of event it was, and all the guest speakers. Now, who the guest speakers were going to tell me who else was going to be in the room, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, like I mentioned, people from the governor's office, economic development people were going to be there. So I'm like, oh, okay, now I have an idea of the types of personalities that are going to be in the room. And I, by the way, am not a Teamster. I'm not in the union at all. I have no idea who any of these people are. So my role was simply to be there and shut up. Like, really, honestly, just be there and be a fly on the wall. I'm a guest of my brother-in-law, so I'm there as a guest. So when I started reading the room, I was more like fascinated about, oh, that person's talking to that person. I didn't know that I didn't know that aide knew that person.
Mm-hmm.
So I started looking at it from that perspective, and then the introductions that I made to myself, from myself to other people, were very minimal. I was very calculated on who I actually spoke to. Kind of to your point earlier about, like, you don't want to make the mistake, right, of talking to the wrong person. So I kind of avoided Teamster people and went straight to the economic development people. Like, I was like, okay, so now I know who that is. I was very calculated about who. I didn't need to meet everybody in the room.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking to meet two or three people that I thought would be impactful to my career or my company at the time, the company that I owned at the time. So I think to your point, how do they read the room? It's way ahead of that. They have to
Mm-hmm.
research. They have to research. They have to know. They have to understand, and then they should have some sort of mission in their brain as to who they want. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that the other side of the coin doesn't impact you, and people that are doing the same thing that really want to meet you, that may not be on your radar. So you got to plan. You have to actually account for some of that as well, and make sure you leave some time for people to come to you, and versus you just constantly being on the take, or on the
It is
guard.
interesting that with like more and more, like with the saturation of social media that we have, with people just entertaining and engaging and all of that, and connecting, I guess, with each other, we've had a decline in the ability of people to be able to network effectively.
Sure.
And I think it's because we have also forgotten, we've had that subsequent decline in doing your research, preparing with due diligence, and then of course being polite and reading the room, you know, and understanding what that politeness is. We've had decline in all those skill sets, and I think we need to I think those are the skill sets that separate people who are just, to your point about your brother-in-law at the time, people who are just worker bees versus people who are in the hierarchy versus people who are actually running stuff. It's those skill sets of networking that kind of that make that separation. All right. Good advice. Back to the book, back to War and Peace. So we're going to pick up here with in volume 1, part 1. We're going to pick up in chapter 6 at a well, I'm going to pick up a chapter 6 with a with an example, one of two examples that we're going to talk about today, an example of human inadequacy.
You only have two?
Oh, I only have two. It's early in the book. It's early in the 1,400 pages. I've only got two. It's early.
Got it. Okay.
Trust me, there will be more. It was past 1 o'clock when Pierre left his friend. On one of those limpid white nights typical of Petersburg in June, Pierre got into a hired cab with every intention of going home. But the nearer he got, the more he realized it would be impossible to get to sleep on a night like this, when it was more like evening or morning. You could see right down the empty streets. On the way, Peter remembered that the old gambling school would be meeting at Anatoly Kuragин's that night, and it would usually lead to a drinking session followed by one of Pierre's favorite pastimes. It would be nice to go to Kuragин's, he thought, but then he remembered that he had promised Prince Andrey he wouldn't go there again. But, as so often happens with people who might be described as spineless, he felt such a strong urge for one more shot at the old debauchery that he decided to go. And it suddenly occurred to him that his promise wasn't valid anyway, because he'd already promised Prince Anatoly that he would go before promising Andrey that he wouldn't. Then he began to think that all promises like that were relative. They had no definite meaning, especially if you imagined that tomorrow you might be dead or something strange might happen, that there would be no difference between honesty and dishonesty. Pierre was very prone to this kind of speculation, which destroyed all his resolutions and intentions. He went to Kuragин's. Pause. That is a perfect example of relativistic thinking, by the way, when you have no moral core. That's what Tolstoy's getting at here. Back to the book. He drove up to the front of a mansion near the Horse Guards barracks where Anatoly lived, went up the well-lit steps and the staircase, and walked in through an open door. There was no one in the vestibule. Empty bottles, cloaks, and overshoes were scattered about everywhere. The place reeked of drink. In the distance, you could hear people talking and shouting. They had finished playing cards and supper was over. Pause, by the way. This is like 4:30 in the morning, by the way. So that's the other thing I want you to understand for what's about to happen here. Kids, listeners, nothing good happens in the world after 2 o'clock in the morning. Just keep that in mind. Back to the book. Pierre threw off his cloak and went into the first room, where there were some leftovers from supper, and a servant, thinking that no one could see him, was downing half-empty glasses on the side. From the third room came great roars of laughter, the sound of familiar voices shouting, and a bear growling. 8 or 9 young men were jostling by each other by an open window. 3 others were playing with a bear cub. Yes, I said a bear cub. One of them yanking its chain and scaring the others with it. "Hold on, Stevens," cried one. "No holding on to the window," shouted another. "My money's on Dolokhov," shouted a third. "You're my witness, Kuragin." "Forget that bear. There's a bear on here. There's a bet on here." "Down in one or you've lost," cried a fourth. "Yakov, bring us a bottle, Yakov," shouted Anatoly, himself a tall, handsome man, standing in his shirt sleeves in the middle of the group, his fine shirt front unbuttoned down to mid-chest. "Hang on, gentlemen. Look who's come. It's old Pierre. Good man." He had turned towards Pierre. From the window, a blue-eyed man of average height, conspicuously sober amidst the drunken uproar, called out clearly, "Come on over here. Sort out your bets." This was Dolokhov, an officer in the Semyonov regiment, a notorious gambler and swaggering madcap, at present living with Anatoly. Pierre beamed at the company. "I don't get it. What's happening?" "Hang on, he's not drunk. Get him a bottle," said Anatoly. He took a glass from the table and walked over to Pierre. "First things first. Have a good drink." Pierre proceeded to down glass after glass, looking doubtfully at the drunken revelers who were crowding around the window again and listening to what they were saying. Anatoly kept his glass topped and told him that Dolokhov had made a bet with an English sailor by the name of Stevens, who was passing through, that he, Dolokhov, could drink a bottle of rum sitting on the third-floor windowsill with his legs dangling outside. "Come on, finish that bottle," said Anatoly, giving Pierre the last glass, "or I'm not letting you go." "No, I don't want it," said Pierre, shoving Anatoly away, and he went over to the window. Dolokhov had a grip on the Englishman's arm, and he was meticulously explaining the terms of the bet, looking mainly at Anatoly and Pierre. Dolokhov was a man of average height in his mid-20s with curly hair and bright blue eyes. Like all infantry officers, he wore no mustache, so that his mouth, the most striking thing about him, was fully revealed. The lines of that mouth were very finely curved. The upper lip closed sharply down in the middle wedge over like a firm lower one, and the two corners of the mouth always worked itself into something like a double smile. All this, together with a decisive, brazen, shrewd look in his eyes, was so impressive that no one could fail to notice his face. Dolokhov was a man of few resources and no contacts. And yet somehow, despite the fact that Anatoly doled out his money in tens of thousands, Dolokhov lived with him and managed to present himself in such a way that Anatoly himself and everybody who knew him or who knew them admired Dolokhov more than Anatoly. Dolokhov gambled on everything and usually won. However much he drank, he always kept a clear head. Both of them, Kuragin and Dolokhov, were curiously infamous figures among the fast and loose young men of Petersburg. The bottle of rum was brought. Two servants, clearly flustered and intimidated by shouts and directions issuing from gentlemen on all sides, were in the process of removing the section of the window frame that prevented anyone from sitting on the outer sill. Anatoly swaggered across to the window, eager to smash something. He shoved the servants out of the way and pulled at the frame, but it wouldn't give. He broke one of the panes. "Come on, Hercules, you have a go," he said, turning to Pierre. Pierre grabbed a hold of the crosspiece and heaved, broke the oak frame with a crash, and wrenched it out. "Get the lot out, or they'll think I'm holding on," said Dolokhov. "The Englishman's bragging, isn't he? Is everything all right?" said Anatoly. "Yes," said Pierre, watching Dolokhov go over to the window, bottle in hand. The light of the sky shone with the merging of dusk and dawn. Dolokhov jumped on the windowsill, still holding his bottle. "Listen," he shouted, standing there and facing back into the room. Silence fell. "I bet you," he spoke in French so the Englishman could understand what he was saying, and his French wasn't too good. "I bet you 50 imperials. Make it 100? He added, turning to the Englishman. No, 50, said the Englishman. "All right, 50 it is. I can drink a whole bottle of rum without taking it away from my lips. I'll drink it sitting outside the window there." He bent down and pointed to the downward sloping ledge on the outside, "without holding on to anything. Is that it?" "Yes," said the Englishman. Anatoly turned to the sailor, took hold of a button on his coat, and looked down at him. He was quite short, and went through the terms of the bet once again in English. "Hang on a minute," shouted Dolokhov, calling for attention by banging the bottle on the windowsill. "Hang on, Kuragin. Listen, if anybody else can do it, I'll pay him 100 imperials, all right?" The sailor nodded with no indication of whether he accepted this new bet or not. Anatoly hung on to him, although the sailor nodded to say he fully understood. Anatoly kept on translating Dolokhov's words into English. A skinny young lifeguardsman who had lost a lot that evening climbed up on the windowsill, stuck his head out and looked down. "Ugh," he said, staring at the pavement. "Attention!" cried Dolokhov, yanking him back in, so he tripped over his spurs and came tumbling down awkwardly into the room. Standing, the bottle on the sill to keep it within easy reach, Dolokhov climbed slowly and deliberately out through the window and let his legs dangle down outside. Bracing himself with both hands against the sides of the frame, he settled himself, sat down, let go with his hands, shuffled slightly to the right, then to the left, and reached for the bottle. Anatoly brought 2 candles and put them on the window ledge, even though it was quite light. Dolokhov's back, with his white shirt and his curly head, were lit up from both sides. Everybody swarmed round the window, the English sailor at the front. Pierre smiled and said nothing. One of the party, a bit older than the rest, suddenly pushed his way through with a scared and angry face and tried to grab at Dolokhov's shirt. "Gentlemen, this is crazy. He'll get killed," said this more sensible man. Anatoly stopped him. "Don't touch him. You'll put him off, and then he will get killed." What about that?" Dolokhov looked around, shifted his position, and was still supporting himself with both hands. "If anybody tries to get a hold of me again," he said, forcing out the words one by one through tight, thin lips, "I'll chuck him down there. Right then." Whereupon he turned around, again to face the outside, took his hands away, picked up the bottle and put it to his mouth, bent his head back, and held his free hand up in the air to balance himself. One of the servants, who had been gone clearing up the broken glass, stood transfixed in a stooping posture, his eyes glued to the window and Dolokhov's back. Anatoly stood erect, staring. The Englishman winced as he watched for one side. The man who had tried to stop it all had rushed into a corner and now lay on the sofa facing the wall. Pierre covered his eyes. A feeble, forgotten smile lingered on his lips. His face was now full of fear and horror. Nobody spoke. Pierre took his hands away from his eyes, and there was Dolokhov still sitting in the same position, only his head was bent so far back that the curls on his neck touched his shirt collar, and the hand with the bottle rose higher and higher, trembling with the effort. The bottle was draining nicely and went higher as it did so, bending the head further back. Why is it taking so long, thought Pierre. More than a half hour seemed to have passed. Suddenly, Dolokhov's spine jerked back, and his arm trembled nervously enough to shift his whole body as he sat on the sloping ledge. He slipped, and his arm and head shook even more violently as he struggled. One hand rose to clutch at the windowsill, but fell back again. Pierre shut his eyes again and swore he would never open them. Then suddenly he was aware of things beginning to move round about him. He glanced up. There was Dolokhov, standing on the window ledge, his pale face full of delight. All gone. He tossed the bottle to the Englishman, who caught it neatly. Dolokhov jumped down from the window, stinking of rum. Well done, bravo. That's a real bet. You're a right devil, you are, came the shouts from all sides. The Englishman took out his purse and counted out the money. Dolokhov stood there frowning and silent. Pierre leapt to the windowsill. Gentlemen, anybody betting? I could do that, he shouted suddenly. I don't even need a bet. No, I don't. Just tell him to get me a bottle. I'll do it. Just get me a bottle. Go on, let him do it, said Dolokhov with a grin. What are you, mad? No one will let you. You get dizzy walking downstairs, came various protests. I'll drink it. Give me that bottle of rum, roared Pierre, thumping his table with deliberate, drunken gesture. And he climbed up into the well of the window. People snatched their arms, but he was so strong he sent them flying if they came anywhere near. No, you'll never talk him out of it like that, said Anatole. Hang on, I know how to fool him. Listen, Pierre, I accept your bet, but for tomorrow night. Right now, we're all going to, go on to you-know-where. Right, let's go, yelled Pierre. Let's go. We can take Bruin with us. And he grabbed the bear, hugged it, lifted it right off the floor, and took it waltzing around the room. I went to my fair share of drunken parties in college. Yes, I did. And I know Tom did as well. Maybe not. Maybe Tom wasn't the one drinking. And sometimes I was drinking and sometimes I wasn't.
I was the sober one in the corner. I really was.
I saw, well, to paraphrase from the replicant in Blade Runner, played by Rutger Hauer, I saw things that you wouldn't believe. And it looks like Tolstoy did as well when he was engaged in drunken shenanigans, when he was in college. And by the way, that is the right term to use even in Russian. It is indeed shenanigans. Count Leo Tolstoy was born on the 9th of September, 1828, and he died on the 20th of November, 1910. And he is, as we've said before on this podcast, along with Dostoevsky, Turgenev, who we just read his book Fathers and Sons, and Anton Chekhov, who we covered last year, his short stories, one of the four greatest Russian writers of the 19th century and one of the greatest Russian writers of all time. And he is the greatest Russian writer of all time because of exactly that little piece that I read just there. That was almost cinematic in how it was put together. He received nominations for the Nobel Prize in Literature every year from 1902 to 1906, and for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1901, 1902, and 1909. Beginning in his late teens, Tolstoy wrote consistently for his entire life. There wasn't a time when he stopped writing. He documented his life, the life of the Russian people, and eventually, as we can see in this piece in War and Peace, life of the overall human experience. From childhood, boyhood, and youth to Anna Karenina and, of course, War and Peace, Tolstoy used the genres of literature, all of them, including critique, to explore not only the depths of other people, but also the depths of himself. By the way, Pierre, in this example, Anatole and Dolokhov, along with all of the other folks, serve as at least in Tolstoy's time, served as a modern example of the dissolute youth, when things were better in the past, when the youth knew how to behave and not engage in drunken revelry with with bear cubs. Oh, and bottles of rum. So my question to Tom is this. Let's start with this. What experience have you had in your life that you would never write down, where you would have to change all the names to protect the guilty?
I'm not going to tell you on here either. Why would I do that? If I wasn't going to write it down, I'm not going to put it out on the internet. Let me. I'll I'll circumvent the question like this.
Circumvent the question. Go ahead.
Regardless of the happenings of the evening, now those of you who don't know Boston, there's a very popular road called Rutherford Avenue, which goes from Boston outside into a neighboring city. And then if you go through that neighboring city, I lived probably 2 cities away. And I remember what now, if we all understand how the painting on pavement works, there's a double yellow line that goes in the middle of the street that you're not supposed to cross. And I remember the most I remember of that evening was me walking on that double yellow line, singing out loud, "Follow the yellow brick road." I'll just leave it at that.
I will say publicly for my part. I had so many drunken shenanigans in college that at one time during a particularly revelrous street festival, the EMTs were called to engage with me. I was fine, but to engage with me to make sure that I was okay. And one of the EMTs was a classmate of mine, and she literally said to me, "I've never seen you sober." And then she walked away.
So you've never seen you sober. So listen to this. So I could probably count on one hand in my entire lifetime that I've had situations like that.
Yeah,
one hand.
Yeah.
Because like I wasn't joking earlier when I say most times I was the guy in the corner of the room, completely sober, making sure that nobody else
died,
drove home drunk, or got into a fight, or I was the party dad.
Right. Yeah.
For all time purposes, most times. So
I was the Englishman in the corner going, not in the corner, but the Englishman going, "Well, I guess I'm going to pay. Let's see how this goes."
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're here now. We might as well go all the way. Like that's,
in for a penny, in for a pound, Longshanks. What are we doing here?
I've had plenty of those friends. and I know how to manage them So one of the things that I find funny, I thought your question was going to be more, business related or leadership related.
Oh, we're getting there. Don't worry, we're wandering in that direction.
Because there was a point in time there where the person, I forget the names at this point, I apologize, but the person who stops the guy from taking the bet, right, that wants to drink the bottle around the fall, and he says, "No, I'll bet you that, but it's for tomorrow night," right? Like that is a great example of just knowing how to read the personalities and knowing when to. It's like that old Kenny Rogers song, right? Like know when to hold them, when to fold them, and if you can base that on the personalities in the room, that's leadership in a nutshell, right? Being able to get things done without having to really force the issue, right? You're just I'll take
rather than laying in the corner on the sofa with like you're curled up. Like I'm imagining the guy curled up on the sofa, like his face turned to the wall because he's like, he doesn't want to see. He's like, I don't want to know. This is gonna be a nightmare.
Exactly. I look at it the same way. Like there's a couple of different versions of parenting out there, right? Whereas like one parent says, "Do this because I said so," and you're going to do it because if you don't, there are consequences because I said so, right? And then there are other parents that over explain to the nth degree, and like, okay, I'm not making fun of those people, and please excuse the face, and then they have the other people that say, that's very clear and say, "Well, why don't you tell me why you think I'm asking you to do that?" And then they take the kid's response and go, "Exactly. See, now you're going to go do that because you know why." It's that reverse psychology thing. Anyway.
The reason why I wanted to read all that is because it opens with a bear and it closes with a bear.
The bear, yeah.
And I couldn't quite wrap my arms around that part.
Yeah.
I never went to parties with bears.
Yeah, no.
Like I would have declined all invitations. If my one of my good friends, and he knows who he is, if he's listening to this, he knows who he is. If he had ever invited me to a party with a bear, I would have said, "I think I'll stay home, but you have a good time." That seems like something that you would need to be involved in. Okay, a couple of ideas that come out of that. Yes, the reading of the room, being able to manage people. Dolokhov is an interesting character, and he's going to become more interesting later on as you go through War and Peace. But he is the guy who, and Tolstoy describes him almost perfectly. I love this description of him. Um, Dolokhov was a man who was of average height. He describes his mouth and all this other stuff. And then he says Dolokhov was a man of very few resources and no contacts. He's got no network, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet somehow, despite the fact that Anatoly doled out his money in tens of thousands, which is the guy that was talking to Pierre and kind of talked him off the ledge and said, "We'll go do this tomorrow night." So Anatoly is the guy who owns the building where all this is going down. He presented his money in tens of thousands. Dolokhov lived with him and managed to present himself in such a way that Anatoly himself and everybody who knew them admired Dolokhov more than Anatoly. Dolokhov gambled on everything and usually won. However much he drank, he always kept a clear head. Both of them, Kuragin and Dolokhov, were currently infamous figures among the fast and loose young men of Petersburg.
So he was the charisma guy, right? Like,
right. So this is a question. The hierarchy, the hierarchy between men. We don't have to actually often talk about this, but the hierarchy of dominance among men. So obviously, you have alphas. People know what that term means. But you also have the young men, and Dolokhov was one of these people who don't care about the hierarchy. Mm-hmm. Like they don't care about the alphas. They don't care about, if we're going to rank them, like the deltas, who are just your calm sort of the party fathers. They don't care about the gammas, who are like, why am I here? I hate all of you. I could be playing PlayStation at home. Like, why are we here? And there's a bear. What are we doing? Right. And they'll turn the bear on you in a heartbeat. That's what a gamma will do. But you've got people who are outside of that hierarchy, and Tolstoy writes about him, and so do a lot of other leaders, a lot of other writers. And The Sun Also Rises, it was the character Mike in there, who just don't care about the hierarchy at all. Like, they just don't care. They're going to do what they're going to do. They're going to drink what they're going to drink. They're going to have relationships with whoever it is they're going to have relationships with. And if you like it, cool. And if you don't, well, that's cool too. Like, we can do this all day, baby. And those tend to be folks who not struggle, but they wander from hierarchy to hierarchy to hierarchy. And Dolokhov is kind of that character. They also tend to be viewed by people who are trying to climb to the top of the hierarchy, particularly among men. They tend to be viewed disagreeably, or like, I don't really know what's going on with that guy. So I guess the question is, what's the best, if you're a leader, what's the best sort of posture to adopt to the hierarchy of dealing with other men? Because we don't really ever talk about that. Like, we talked about women a little bit on this podcast, but specifically about the male hierarchy, because there is that male social sexual, I guess is how you can frame it, but social hierarchy. Like, how do you climb that with other dudes if you're not the alpha and you don't care about any of that? Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us, that's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show.
That's a tough question. So for me, I think this is a really, really, we could probably have a podcast episode just on this,
Oh
honestly,
yeah. Oh yeah.
because I first of all, the idea for me, to me anyway, of having that whole alpha this, alpha that is ridiculous. Because guess what? When we all cut open, we all bleed red. It you are a human being just the way I am. I am not putting anybody above me. In the same sense, I'm also not putting anybody below me. I don't
Okay.
step all over people either, right? Like I'm not just gonna say, well, that guy's he's a he's a beta, like he doesn't care. You can walk all over him, he's not gonna push back. And I was always that kid in school that protected the kids that the bullies wanted to pick on all the time.
Yeah.
I I, I can most of the actual fist fights I've ever been in my life where it had nothing to do with me.
Mm.
It's always been like I was always that guy that would come across some bully picking on a kid, and I would step in going, "What are you doing? Like, why are
Right.
we picking on this kid? Stop
Right.
picking on this kid." And then we would get into a fight, and then we would walk away friends because inevitably I never really lost a fight. But that's all right. That's different. But that's not the point. The point is, I think because of that too, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here because like you have a martial arts background, I have a martial arts background. I think some of that plays into it into effect too, because
Mm.
I don't care who I walk into the room with. I don't care who you think you are. I'm not taking crap from you. I don't care if you think you're alpha or not. Now, that being said, somebody who thinks they're alpha that comes at me in a particular way, I will definitely listen. I'll sit there and listen. I'll jab jaw with you all day long. I'll have your opinions come down to me all you want. In the vice versa. So this is a really hard question for me to answer because I've always fought against that alpha thing.
Mm.
Right? Like I've
Yeah.
always fought against that. That says you don't have to be that. And if you think you are that, you can. If you feel the necessity to be that, there's still a way to do it that you can make other people feel inclusive, and then you make other people feel value. Alpha does not equate to a value higher than other people, in my opinion.
Okay.
The fact that and I understand general society disagrees with me and there are alpha people out there and I get that, right? But the fact that you call somebody an alpha does not mean that their value is higher than anybody else's.
So I am of the thought that if you are claiming you're an alpha, you're not.
Well, that too.
If you have to say it, you ain't it.
Yeah.
Like you ain't. If you have to say it, you ain't it. That's number one. Number two, if I don't care about that status and I'm going to operate in the room anyway, and this is one of the things I learned in the midst of all my drunken shenanigans in college. This is one of the social cultural things I did pick up. If I just operate regardless of what anybody else is doing, and I stay really focused on that thing, like if I'm going to a party and I know there's going to be shots of Jaeger, and I know that I don't have a good background with any of that, I'm not drinking any of that. And so someone's going to come to me. Here's what's going to happen. Someone's going to come to me. By the way, cops do this too to you. They'll offer you a piece of gum. This is why a cop offers you a piece of gum before an interrogation. They want to see if you're going to like break and respond to that, right? Now, if I know I'm operating regardless of whatever else is happening because I've got my own agenda, go ahead, you could offer me a Jaeger shot. That's fine. What I'm going to say is a very simple word, like, no, I don't want that. I won't offer up an option for an alternative. I'm not going to make a suggestion to make you feel better. I'm just going to say, no. Which, by the way, drives my wife crazy when I will do this at social functions sometimes because they'll offer me something like, no. Then you just wait. Right. And you just wait and you watch them get uncomfortable because you didn't offer them another out, right? Just, no, I don't want that thing. You don't want anything else? No, I didn't say that. I just said I don't want that thing. If you're offering something else, like, let's talk. But you just offer me this one thing. Okay. By the way, cops, when they offer you a piece of gum in an interrogation or a cup of coffee, say no. That's the key word. Keyword is no. I think that act right there separates people who, to your point, play in the hierarchy and people who don't. because there's a lot of people who do try to climb above other people. And the person, I think anyway, the leader who can watch that and not succumb to it is the leader who's going to be successful.
It's also the leader you want to follow.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It's like somebody who is like somebody who is clear. You know what the best way I there was an exercise I went through it. It was a management training program that I was in. It was very young. There was about 30 of us in the room, and the instructor, the person who was running the training said, I need 3 groups of 10. You guys figure out which 10 you want to be in or whatever. And I said nothing. I literally just walked onto the side of the room and just waited and watched. And I saw, okay, these people, whatever. And I'm like, this group has 10, this group has 10, this group has 9. They're missing me. And I was like, I don't want to be part of that group. So I went over, tapped somebody on the shoulder. I was like, excuse me, do you mind if I step in here? They only have 9. They could use somebody over there. And they went and they moved. And the instructor was like, okay, you come here. I was like, what did I do? What did I do? I didn't do anything. She's like, no. She's like, you didn't do anything wrong. I just want to point this out. And she like made a point of it that was like, like when you're in kind of manner, like, why are you jumping head first into like, why aren't you, to your point, we've said read the room about 1,000 times on this episode of this podcast, but like, why aren't you trying to understand where you fit best and then placing yourself in there versus just following the crowd around until something just stops and happens, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
So then the exercise got even better where it's like, all right, out of the 10, we have 3 groups of 10. They gave us all this kind of task with no instruction. I want you guys to accomplish X, whatever that was. And again, I sat there, I was listening. Now, I picked the group I picked for a very particular reason. I knew most of these people. I knew their strengths and weaknesses because we had been in the same company with each other for a long time, and I know them. So they started talking. We do this, we do that. 15 people going, we should do this. No, 15. So all 9 of the other people were like throwing in ideas, just throwing in ideas. And I'm sitting there, I'm listening, and I'm watching, and I'm going, none of this is going to work.
Right.
It's like, so I just said, I go, hold on a second, guys. I said, can I just ask a question? They were like, well, do you have an idea? And I go, no, I have a question. I don't have an idea. I have a question. What makes you think each of these things are going to work? Can you just explain why they're going to work? And as soon as they started talking, then other people were like, well, no, that's not going to work because of this. Oh, no, that's not going to work because of that. And you know what? You're right. And okay, so we can agree on this and that. And I was like, okay, so we've eliminated like 4 out of the 9 here. Great. So now out of the other 5, everyone thinks that all these 5 are going to be okay. And I was just asking again. I didn't tell them to do anything. I was not. I was just trying to understand because now, of course, for this purpose, this was a competitive situation. There was a prize. There was a prize involved at which team came out with the best solution to this problem.
Yeah.
Well, I like to win, right? I may not claim to be alpha, but I like to win. I'm very competitive when it comes to winning something, and being, and I'm very team oriented, so I had no problem including the rest of the team. I did not want to quote unquote be in charge, or had no interest, but I had an interest in winning.
Right.
Yeah, that had more power. That had more power to me than trying to be alpha or whatever. So I was like, okay, now we got these 5. And I just worked through this process, and they were like, all right. And then when the instructor came back, time was up, and she goes, all right, each group has to pick a person to present this, and they want, who's going to be the leader? Who's going to be the leader of this? And all 9 of them said, Tom, you should be the leader. Go do this. And I said, no, time out. They want somebody that's going to present this in a way that's going to help us win. I think Mary should do it. Mary, it was Mary's original idea. She had the best formation of the blah 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 blah. Right, whatever. Like, we should have Mary do it. And they were like, oh, okay, that's good. All right, we'll have Mary do it. And we ended up winning that competition thing. And when the instructor asked the group, because then they did this like debriefing thing separately. So all the groups went into separate rooms, and the instructors, there was like 4 instructors for this. This thing was like a 2-week long like deep management seminar thing where it was 8 hours a day, 2 weeks, and it was for a very big company, which I really appreciate, by the way. They did a really nice job with this management training. but anyway, so they got us all in separate rooms. And when the instructor came in, they were like, "Oh, so Mary, you're the leader." And Mary's like, "No, no, Tom's probably going to be. I would think Tom would be the leader. I was just the presenter."
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, "Okay, so I'm confused now because we asked you guys to have your leader present, and you put Mary up front." And
Mm-hmm.
there was this huge discussion, and we ended up winning simply for that because we didn't take because they gave very little instruction, but yet we looked at it from a very high level management problem solving process that
Right.
we were taking, and we weren't worried. Like we won not because our idea was better, because the process we used
The
in order to
process.
get there, and how we presented it was the best option that our group had. It wasn't
Right.
so it was very interesting. So to your back to your point, it was like I think that I think that like the whole idea of a hierarchy. Now, take out the corporate hierarchies that we are definitely required to have. You need to have somebody in charge, like the C level, the VP level, the management level, director levels. All that stuff makes sense to me. We need to, but I think where we lack is the process in which we take in order to promote those people into those positions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My world is the absolute most horrific at this. If you take, because you have a sales team, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have 12 salespeople, your sales manager quits. You
Right.
go, "Oh, Hassan's our number one salesperson."
Number one salesperson.
Like, he's the manager now. And then it doesn't work
Right.
because it's somebody like that number one salesperson oftentimes doesn't want to manage. They just want to they just want to sell.
Right.
Like they're the number one salesperson for a reason because they
Right.
love it. They love doing what they do. They don't want to deal with the rest of it. And I think that's part of the real problem is understanding that it doesn't need to be a hierarchy of personality. It needs to be a hierarchy of problem solving skills.
The problem solving skills. Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
No, I would agree with that. Yeah.
I rambled for way too long on that one.
Well, no, but I mean, myself and John Hill have talked about this because he's also in consultative selling,
Yeah.
And we've talked about this on previous podcasts, and it is, and and honestly, that's part of what he focuses on is how do you take those that person who is a leader in a very particular, not even a leader, a producer in a very particular space, and turn them into a leader, because now they're going from one type of hierarchy. We're going to draw it all together. They're moving from one particular hierarchy to another hierarchy with very different rules, and very different metrics of success
And expectations.
Correct. Exactly. All right. We're rounding the corner here. So back to the book. This is going to be a very short piece here, and we're going to wrap up. So back to the book, back to War and Peace. We are still in volume 1, part 1. And in subsequent episodes, we will get to volume 1, part 2, and volume 2, part 3, and volume 3, part 4. It just goes on and on, folks. So hang out. We're going to be in War and Peace for, like I was saying before, potentially years. Like in that Pink Floyd song on Dark Side of the Moon. Years. Absolutely years I've been down here. Most of us have, though. If you could name what song that is, send me an email and I'll send you a no prize, like they used to out of the back of Marvel Comics back in the day when you would spot a mistake. Stan Lee would send you a no prize. Back to the book, volume 1, part 1, chapter 5. Very short piece here. Thanking Anna Pavlovna for a delightful evening, the guests began to go home. So this is after Anna Pavlovna's party, but before Pierre and Anatoly's shenanigans with Dolokhov in the window. And this is, by the way, where we meet Pierre. Pierre was ungainly, stout, quite tall, and possessed of huge red hands. It was said of him that he had no idea how to enter a drawing room and was worse still at withdrawing from one or saying something nice as he left. He was also absent-minded. He stood up now, picking up a general's nicely plumed three-corner hat instead of his own, and held on to it, pulling at the feathers until the general asked for it back. But all his absent-mindedness and his inability to enter a drawing room or talk properly once inside it were redeemed by his expression of good-natured simplicity and modesty. Anna Pavlovna turned to him, forgiving his outburst with Christian humility, nodded and said, I hope we shall see you again. But I also hope you will change your ideas, my dear Monsieur Pierre. She spoke, but he didn't answer. All he did was bow and show everyone another of his smiles, a smile that simply said, never mind ideas, look at what a nice, good-natured, good-hearted fellow I am. And everyone, including Anna Pavlovna, couldn't help but agree. Prince Andrey had gone out in the hall, and as he offered his shoulders to the servant, ready with his cloak, he listened indifferently to his wife as she chattered with Prince Hippolyte, who had come along with her. Hippolyte stood close to the pregnant little princess, who looked so pretty, and stared at her through his lorgnette. Go back inside, Annette, you'll catch cold, said the little princess, taking leave of Anna Pavlovna. It is settled then, she added quietly. Anna Pavlovna had managed to have a few words with Liza about the match she was setting up between Anatoly and the little princess's sister-in-law. I'm relying on you, my dear, said Anna. By the way, pause. That's an example of what Tom was talking about previously, about going to parties and networking with the right people, right? Pavlovna wanted to use her party to create social connections for St. Petersburg society and, of course, for Russian society. Back to the book. I'm relying on you, my dear, said Anna Pavlovna no less quietly. Write to her and let me know how her father sees things. Au revoir. And she left the hall. Prince Hippolyte moved in on the little princess and, bending down with his face close to her, started speaking to her in a half whisper. Two servants, one the princess's, the other his own, stood with the shawl and coat waiting for them to finish talking. The French was incomprehensible to them, but the servant's face suggested for all the world that they did understand what was being said, though they would never show it. The princess, as always, smiled as she talked and laughed when she listened. I'm so glad I didn't go to the ambassadors, Prince Hippolyte was saying. Such a bore. This has been a delightful evening, hasn't it? Delightful. They say it will be a very fine ball, answered the little princess, drawing up her downy little lip. All our pretty women will be there. Not all of them. You won't be there, said Prince Hippolyte with a happy laugh. Then he snatched the shawl from the servant, shoving him out of the way, and began draping it around the little princess. Either from awkwardness or deliberately, no one could have said which, he kept his arms round her for some time after the shawl had been put on, seeming to clasp the young woman in his embrace. With good grace and still smiling, she wriggled free, turned and glanced at her husband. Prince Andrei's eyes were closed. He seemed to be weary and drowsy. Are you ready? He asked his wife, looking over her head. Prince Hippolyte hurried into his long coat. It was the last word in fashion, going right down to his heels, and he caught his foot in it as he ran out onto the steps after the princess. A servant was assisting her into the carriage. Au revoir, princess, he yelled, his tongue tripping over things just like his legs. The princess picked up her gown and took her seat, settling back into the darkness of the carriage while her husband was arranging his sword. Prince Hippolyte pretended to help, but all he did was get in the way. If you don't mind, sir, said Prince Andrey curtly and pointedly in Russian to Prince Hippolyte, who was standing in his way. I'll see you soon, Pierre, said the same voice in warm and friendly tones. The coachman jerked forward, and the carriage rattled off. Prince Hippolyte honked with laughter as he stood on the steps, waiting for the Viscount, having promised to drop him off at home. One of the interesting things about books like War and Peace, and you see this in a little bit in the Brothers Karamazov, but Dostoevsky was way more pessimistic and dour than Tolstoy and less romantic. So he didn't really care about the romance between men and women. And you kind of get some of it in Anton Chekhov's short stories as well, is this idea of the arrangements between men and women and the relationships between men and women, and particularly at an aristocratic level, how those relationships cycle together. And there's an old school word that I'm going to use here at the end of the podcast that is sort of being set up here that describes the relationship that is being set up. And by the way, Prince Andrey recognizes this. Prince Hippolyte recognizes this, and the princess, the pregnant princess, recognizes this as well. And it is a system of cuckoldry that is being set up. Now, we don't talk about this in polite society in America because, God forbid, we talk about that in polite society in America. We talk about every other form of sexual behavior, but not that. We also don't talk about the nature of how affairs begin that move relationships with each other. And what Tolstoy is setting up is that as well. By the way, we find out later on that Prince Andrey and the pregnant princess are having trouble in their marriage because Prince Andrey wants to go off and fight a war, and his wife, who is pregnant, wants him to stay at home, and he has zero interest in staying at home. As a matter of fact, he tells Pierre, basically, don't ever get married because women will stop you from having ambition, while his wife is sitting there. These kinds of things happen in Tolstoy all the time, though. They happen in all kinds of books he wrote because he was in those drawing rooms and he saw those relationships between people in Russian culture, and he wrote honestly about it. And it does create a sense of low drama, which, of course, makes for the higher drama that's going to occur later on the battlefields of Napoleon, and makes it a lot sharper, particularly with what's about to happen to Prince Andrey and even the princess. I guess maybe I would close our episode today, because Tom has to go, as do I, with this question. It is going to be open-ended because it's War and Peace and it's 1,400 pages, so we might as well have an open-ended question to end this episode. What do we do with those interpersonal human relationships between men and women that are the tripwires that lead to larger things? Because we don't talk about those tripwires in our culture. We talk about literally everything else, but we don't talk about the CEO that can't get along at home, or every time he goes to a party or she goes to a party, their partner or their husband or their wife is off doing something that we don't. And when those things are revealed, as in the case of Nancy Pelosi and Paul Pelosi, I'll just use those as two examples most recently in the American public, we all pretend to be shocked and kind of side eye and move away from it. And yet, this is what's been going on for literally since men and women were created. Literally. But we can't, but in our brazenly open society, we can't talk about this. And that is a weird thing to me. And what Tolstoy does, this is why it's a throwback book, he reveals all of that. And he says, no, this is actually what's going on. He doesn't make a judgment about it. He just says, this is what's going on. And we don't seem to know what to do with that. It kind of makes us uncomfortable. It's making Tom uncomfortable right now, just having him think about it. I can tell by his face.
No, I'm not. I wouldn't say uncomfortable. I'm trying to figure out what kind of response I would have to this, because quite honestly, I'm really not sure. Like, I think for me, again, this is really more. This is a personal response, not a response of society and in generalities. Yeah. But I've always found that communication is key, right? Like well, first of all, if my significant other cheated on me and my family acted surprised, that would be my fault for not ever giving them an indication that there was a problem in the marriage, right? Like, right. So I think there's I think the rules are just different when it comes to people in the public eye, right? Like, yeah, because no matter how bad things are at home, that forward facing, they're going to give you they're going to give you some sort of facade because they want you to vote for them again. So you're not going to vote for somebody who has turmoil at home. You're going to vote for somebody that's showing that they have all of their stuff together, so to speak. And
well, you even see this with the royal family in England. Like, yes. What's her name? Wasn't around. Whoever Williams, Kate, that woman, Kate, she wasn't around or whatever. Middleton, something. I don't know. I find it annoying that yes, I find it annoying that I have to know who these people are. Like, I find it incredibly annoying. But they are the kind of people that Tolstoy's writing about.
Yes.
And there's whispered speculation about this and that and this and no and the other and all this other kind of stuff. And I'm over here in the corner, like the guy curled up in the sofa. I'm the guy curled up in the sofa going, I don't care, into my pillow. Stop yelling at me about this. Yeah. But they are those kinds of people. And like, they weren't voted in, but they're public people.
Right. And by the way, I'm talking about anybody public. It doesn't have to be a public, like a voted figure, but think about all the Hollywood, Hollywood couples that when they break up, everyone's like, oh my God, I can't believe they broke up. And you find out, well, because every time they walk on the red carpet, they're hand in hand and they're smiling and they're actors and actresses, so that they're pretending that everything's okay, and we love them and we think they got the greatest relationship ever, and then we find out they break up and we're like, and we're scratching our head. I think go back to again. So me personally,
Mm-hmm.
I think personally for me, communication is the key. I don't want to. There's a reason that people say that the more truthful you are, the better memory you have, right? Like, because you
Yes.
don't, if you're not lying and you're trying to remember all these lies that you're telling your friends and family about your relationship or about what's going on in your life or whatever, the easier it is to communicate with them. And the easier
Mm-hmm.
it is to communicate with them, the more in tune to you they are. And when the feces hits the fan, they're not surprised and they're there to help you through it. And
Okay.
they're not
Oh,
surprised, and and if they're still willing to be a willing participant in your recovery through whatever process you just went through, that's why they're there. That's why your family and friends are there.
okay. So that's at the heavy end of this.
Yes.
What is described in this passage is what some people during, actually, what people during that time, and probably even people during this time, will describe as a light flirtation.
Sure.
Right. Hippolyte is lightly flirting with this guy's wife in front of the guy, which, by the way, like he's holding. I don't know if you noticed, dude. Old boy's got a sword.
Yeah.
Like he might, like, guys don't actually carry around swords unless they know how to use them. Like, so what are you doing anyway? Anyway, and it, by the way, was it mentioned that the prince who was tripping over his coat of latest fashion didn't mention he was carrying a sword? So you came unarmed to a sword fight.
Yeah.
That seems
Right.
like a bad idea.
It,
But the Billy Graham rule. We've never talked about that on this podcast, but the Billy Graham rule, the now deceased theologian Billy Graham used to have a rule. And his rule was he never traveled with a woman that wasn't his wife. He was never in a room with a woman that wasn't his wife. He wouldn't even go to like a hotel bar, right, of a conference that he was at with a woman that wasn't his wife. He didn't want to be seen there because as a theologian, he knew that just like the Caesars of old, the appearance of impropriety can sometimes stand in for impropriety itself. And a lot of people hated on Billy Graham, a lot of women in particular, because they were like, well, how am I going to network with him if I can't? And da, 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 this whole dynamic, right? And I think objections like that fundamentally ignore the dynamics between men and women and the potential for dynamics between men and women. And I think the Billy Graham rule fundamentally acknowledges those differences, but it does so in a way that says it's on the man to make the decision, not on somebody else. Okay. If I'm a leader, should I be engaged with propriety with my female subordinates? Should I be engaged with propriety there? Should I have some sort of boundaries set up if I'm a male leader? And by the way, if I'm a female leader, should I be having some that should I have boundaries? Should that be a thing?
in I would say probably 95% of the cases, absolute yes. Absolute yes. Billy Graham's rule of thumb probably is not the worst thing in the world. And by the way, you keep saying, or you said, I won't be in I won't be in a room with a woman that's not my wife. It's more about I won't be in a room alone with a
Right.
woman that's not my wife, right? So I just want
Correct.
to
Yeah.
make sure there's a distinction there. There's a distinction
Yes.
there because again, if you're in a room full of people and the woman that and you happen to be talking to a woman, it's not nearly as
Egregious.
yes, or potentially uh, improprietary looking, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whereas if you're in a room alone with a woman that's not your wife, that could potentially be taken a whole hell of a lot of different ways, and
Right.
I agree with that part. So yeah, I don't see where this could be a bad thing for you if you're a leader and you're in a your subordinate happens to be female. Now, I understand that there might be situations where you just simply can't avoid it. You're in your
Mm-hmm.
office. She comes in your office to ask you a question. You're alone in a room without your wife. But if it were me, I'd make sure that office has glass walls.
And
Like,
open doors.
open doors. Do not. So instead, the rule of thumb is, if you come into my office, do not close the door.
Right.
Right. So you can still put yourself in better positions than to make sure. And again, I agree with you 110% that the leader is irrelevant, whether it's male or female. I think the same rules apply, especially
Yeah.
in today's world. The same rules apply. I don't think that you should be excluded because you're a woman, and people think you can't have impropriety. Of course you can.
Mm-hmm.
You can be accused of things just like everybody else. So I think that the same rules apply, absolutely. But I think you should, again, I go back to, communication is the ultimate weapon in this environment.
Right.
If you have protocols already in place, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's very well known that these are the protocols, then, because it could potentially backfire you the other way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if a male subordinate comes in the room and he's allowed to shut the door, but a female is not,
Mm-hmm.
that could be taken as a discriminatory act.
Mm-hmm.
So if you treat everybody the same and you say, if you are the only person in my office, the door stays open, regardless of you're male or female, that eliminates you from that discriminatory act as well.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a known protocol, meaning this is how my office is going to run. If you and two other people come in the door and you want to shut the door, that's fine. But no one person is going to leave the door open. I want to make that very well known. Make it a form of communication protocol. So
Mm-hmm.
if your company has communication protocols, which, by the way, would also categorize, if I email you, this is the time response. If you text me, the time response. If you call me and you leave a voicemail, the time response. If you come into my office, leave the door open. It's a form of communication protocol that you can have laid out for everybody as a rule, which eliminates the discriminatory potential of it. But
There
I
you go.
think, to me, communication, all of that is the most relevant thing when it comes to those types of environments.
And with that, we're at the end of chipping away the first basal layer of Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. Join us for part 2 of this at some time in the near future on an episode of Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast near you. Once again, I would like to thank Tom Libby for coming on today. And with that, we're out. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.